And we're talking about what we had done in Sunday school and Bible school and stuff, or Bible study, and they're getting ready to study Bathsheba. They're studying
the bad women of the Bible. Yeah, I've seen those. Yeah. We already have two people on here. So this is Jim Lamb and Christy Jordan, maybe something like that. Strange. I just pushed the button and there was one. There was two. It was one, and now there's one. So I'm not sure. One of them left. One of them was waiting and then left. So okay. All right. So we're about there, and we are going to start the book of Daniel. And I'm going to cover my. I'm going to watch myself. And see, I'm going to show so you guys here. See, that's if I don't have that on.
Oh.
See, and so well, right, but if I don't, I have. Then I'm sitting there looking at myself, and I don't want to do that. I don't like that. So this is why I put that on there, so I don't have to look at myself. Okay, so we are going to do the book of Daniel, and this is like Revelation. Daniel is apocalyptic, so it does have that kind of end time feel or apocalypse feel of it. It's the only apocalyptic book in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew Bible. There are some books that are what are called apocrypha, and the apocrypha are books that were written. They're kind of in between the Old Testament and the New Testament, but they're not recognized as actual books of the Bible. Now you have some Bibles. See, mine says with apocrypha.
Oh.
Okay, and so some of them do have. So mine has.
No,
it doesn't.
No?
Okay.
I have one at home that does.
Yeah, you probably do. Other ones do.
I have a separate one. Yeah,
Could be. And others in those books in the apocrypha, First Enoch, Syriac, Baruch, and those three are apocrypha, apocalyptic. So, and that's sort of the Old Testament was kind of closed. That time of prophets was over. People were waiting for the coming of the Messiah, and so I think that's maybe why those kinds of things were written quite a bit at that point. So we're going to kind of talk about for a minute. We're going to talk about just who wrote Daniel, that kind of background stuff. Now, who you say or who authors say composed the book and when is very much up for discussion. And the Bible that I read out of, which is the Oxford New Revised Standard, it says that while it says Daniel, that Daniel did not write Daniel. That's what mine says. That Daniel was actually written by a Jew that was living during the persecutions of Antiochus Epiphanes, yeah, in like 167 to 164 BC. And so there's reasons for that. And a lot of it has to do with the type of language that's used, with some of the historical references. The problem is that Daniel, in addition to being apocalyptic, is prophetic, which is, I mean, they go together. And so basically, because the prophecies in the book were so came out so well, then it appears as if it was written later once those things had happened. And so, now the Eerdmans commentary that I also use goes exactly the opposite, and it says that the author is Daniel.
Mine says traditionally has been named the author.
Right, and that's the way it goes. Is that there's a traditional, and then there's a who they think. What does yours say?
Well, mine, I can't find where it says.
It doesn't say who wrote it,
Well, probably, and I'm not seeing it.
because the most generally on that
Yeah.
introductory page it would tell you
Tell you, yeah.
who wrote it.
Mine says in several passages, such as 9:2 and 10:2,
Well,
the
here
book
it gives a
implies
date where-
that Daniel was
It,
the author.
it implies, but that's
It
a very
doesn't-
common that thing of using, and the reason for that is because it uses the term I. That Daniel is talking and he says I did such and such, but that's a very common thing that they would do.
Got all kinds of stuff in it. New Living.
This is the
Like
widely held
application
view that the
thing,
book of
but-
Daniel is largely fictional,
So thick.
rests mainly on the modern blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
Why?
yeah, right. And that's and you know, it's one of those that the idea of if it's fictional is I would not use that term. I don't like using that term for anything in the Bible. Is fictional because you know, I don't know. But so it could be that it's written by Daniel in mine says roughly that would be, if, assuming that Daniel wrote it, it would be during the period of when they're in exile, and that was like 500 BC. 587 is when they go into exile. And so if it's Daniel that wrote it, then it would be written sometime around there. If it's written by someone later using stories about that, then it could be in this one says in the 160s BC. So big difference about when they're written. One of the things.
There it is, yeah. Right there in caps.
Right there in capital letters, Daniel wrote.
Daniel wrote. Okay, Daniel wrote.
Look at that.
Between approximately 536 BC.
And
Mine says 605 to 530.
That's what mine says.
Okay.
Recording events that occurred from 605 to 536 BC.
okay, right. So that would be during that Babylonian captivity part. Okay, right. One of the things though that complicates this is the fact that the book of Daniel is actually written in two different languages. There's part of it that is written in Hebrew, and then there's part of it that's written in Aramaic. And while those are similar, those are not the exact same languages. Aramaic is it's a more common man version of Hebrew, so that it's not as scholarly. It's not as it would be kind of like well, I mean, you know, we don't have. We wouldn't think of it as a different language, but you would have. Well, it's kind of like British English and American English. British English, you know, is more upper crust, formal. It's a different language. I mean, British English. American English is a little less. And so so if you have a book that's written part in one and part in the other, it makes you wonder. And part of that is that scholars believe, or scholars are not sure of, let's say, when Aramaic was even developed, that Aramaic, the main belief is that it's developed later, that it's later than the 500 BC. And if that's the case, then if it's written in Aramaic, well, then it obviously must have been written later because it's in there. But just because the copy they have is written in Hebrew and Aramaic does not mean that the original copies were written in two different languages. We don't have the original copies of any of this stuff. Okay. All we have is the ones that we can get that are the oldest, and those are not the originals. Those are somebody took other versions and they copied them off, or they wrote their own versions of them. Maybe someone had the original that was all, say, in Hebrew, and they were writing along in Hebrew, and then that person died, and somebody else got somebody else to come in, and they translated all of the Hebrew into Aramaic. You know what I mean? So it could be there. You don't know, and it could simply be that it was written in, say, 600 to 500 basically is what y'all are talking about. But then in the 160s, somebody came along and took that and basically translated it into or rewrote it and maybe updated the language and all that kind of stuff. There's no to the extent that we're not looking at the originals of any of these things. I think it's really hard to say, well, you know, it was written by this one, or it wasn't written by that one. It's hard to know. It is very difficult to know. And so I always tend to go with whatever the tradition says. The tradition says that Daniel wrote this without there being very obvious evidence against that. I will tend to say that that's Daniel that wrote it, right? And even if not, it's very likely that it all came from stories. It may not have been originally written down. It may have been oral for a while, and so we don't know those things. We don't know those things.
Well, anytime you translate from one language to another, it's going to be different.
Mhm.
And then it's like, okay, remember when we were kids, maybe we played that
Telephone
game,
mhm.
you know, it's kind of like that.
Mhm.
And by the time it gets around this table, it'll be a completely different story.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, that may have happened with this. It
Yeah.
may happen with all of it, as a matter, you know.
Yeah, and it's you know, it's inspired. We as United Methodists will say it is inspired by God. It is not written by God. I mean, God doesn't, you know, take his finger and do all that, but it's inspired, and so we would believe that the original was inspired by God. I would even say that the translations were inspired by God, but that doesn't mean that there couldn't have been problems. In you know, in antiquity, they would have these things, and people would write things in the margins. You know, they would put a note. Well, then the next guy translating it picks that up out of the margin and puts that in as if it's in the book. Well, it wasn't in the original, but it is now, and that, you know, I mean, I don't think that that was somebody's thought about that or something. I don't know. And so it becomes a word of explanation. Well, I don't, you know, it doesn't change whether or not that was true or not, just because maybe it has a note that wasn't original. I mean, I don't think that, and even that note can be inspired by God. Maybe the person that was reading it and wrote the note, God said, you know, that's a little hard to understand. Why don't you write in the margin, right? You know, and then down the line, he tells them, you know, I mean, we don't know how that works. So we don't know. Now, mine does say that that Daniel is referred to twice in Ezekiel, the book, so that in terms of whether or not Daniel is a historical figure, an actual historical figure, he is referenced twice in Ezekiel, and his name does appear in a North Canaanite clay tablet text found in some place called Ras Shamra, which that then provides external. That yours probably doesn't refer to that, but that provides some external support that there was this guy Daniel who was active in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, and so that leads credence. It's like when you're dealing with issues of Jesus, you know. There are some people that will say, well, the only place that Jesus wasn't a real person, the only place you can read about Jesus is in the Bible. That's not true. There are a number of Roman historians that reference Jesus, and they reference him living and they reference him dying on a cross. It's in the histories. It's not, those are independent from the Bible. Josephus he's Hebrew, but he's Roman, and he wrote about all that area, and Jesus is in there. So I mean, you can't. That is external proof that whoever this is actually exists. Okay, so Daniel is a figure that exists. You know, some people say that it's all made up. How you could prove yes or no? You can't. Obviously, the Jews accept it because it's in it. They're the ones that decide what is in their book, and the book of Daniel is in their book. Interestingly enough, if you notice the location, if you go back, you have the histories, which is everything up to
The books of Moses, is that?
well, no, that's the Pentateuch. That's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The book of the histories are normally go up through Job, so that includes all of the Pentateuch, plus it includes Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job. Those are all histories, right? Notice Daniel's not a history. Okay, it's not, even though it's got historical stuff, it's not a history. Then you have what are called the wisdom literature, which are the Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. Those are considered wisdom literature. Then you have what are called the book of the prophets, okay? Or it's sometimes referred as the writings. And the writings are kind of divided into two groups. You have the major prophets and the minor prophets. And the major prophets then are Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Lamentations, which is a companion to Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And then you have Daniel, and then you go on to the other minor prophets, which are Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, blah, 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 those minor prophets. And so Daniel is kind of in between the major prophets. It's at the end of the major prophets and the start of the minor prophets. And he's a prophet, but he's not a prophet in the normal sense, because the major prophets, those guys are like, everybody recognizes them. They're court prophets. They're, you know what I'm saying? They have an office that has their on the door it says prophet Isaiah. You know what I mean? They have an office in the court. You know, they're known. They're courtly prophets. By the time you get to the minor prophets aren't like that. The minor prophets they're not always recognized as prophets. They're not as well known. Sometimes they're pretty local, and so they're different. But the other part of that is that Daniel, normally the major prophets and the minor prophets speak for God. Daniel doesn't really do that. Daniel he's interpreting dreams, and that type of thing, which is more prophetic, is more apocalyptic, but he doesn't function quite the same way the other prophets do, and so he doesn't exactly fit in. He doesn't fit into any of these categories, and so it's just a little bit different for him. The book is made up of there's like what was it? We have there are 6 stories in the book of Daniel. There are 6 independent stories, and then there are 4 visions, and that's it. 6 stories, 4 visions. It's not a very long book, and so it's not like 6 stories and then 4 visions. It breaks. It's kind of broken up a little bit, and so there are times when we're just getting stories of things. We're being told of things. Now Daniel is, and we'll go ahead and start reading Daniel, and we'll learn a little bit about who Daniel is in the reading. Okay, but Daniel he's a different kind of guy in a different kind of place at a different time. Okay, so remember, we're talking about the people of Israel. I mean, all of it, Israel and Judah both have been conquered and destroyed, and the people have been carried off to Babylon. And that's Daniel. All of the book of Daniel happens in Babylon, right? I mean, it's not, Daniel is never in Israel. This is in Babylon.
Where is Babylon?
Babylon is what we consider current day Iraq.
Okay.
Persia. It's the Persian Empire would include Iran, Iraq, that area.
Okay.
Iran, Iraq. Yeah. In fact, Babylon itself, the city of Babylon is in Iraq. Supposedly, at some point, what's his name? Saddam Hussein he was trying to rebuild Babylon and make it his capital and all kinds of stuff. That didn't work out too well. He didn't have the money to do that kind of thing. So, okay. So with that in mind, if the people are in exile, that kind of tells you something about their mindset, what they're going through. I mean, remember, I talked about that these are people that they thought that if God was in the temple, and if the temple's gone and they're not in the temple, there's no temple anymore, then where's God? God isn't with them. They feel like God's abandoned them, all that kind of stuff. And so,
do they still have the Ark of the Covenant?
no, it's been gone longer. It's been gone even longer than this. So no, they don't. They don't have any of that kind of stuff. It's all gone. All gone. I see you guys looking at your maps. So okay,
I wish I
I'll
had a map.
do you not have any maps in your Bible?
No, not.
What kind of Bible? What kind of Bible does not have any maps? I don't understand that.
I know where. I've got one.
Yeah, if you if you look, I'm looking at mine. Mine has it's a map that is in the time of the Assyrian Empire, and you see Babylon is that whole area right there is current day Iran, Iraq.
Here, I got Samaria here.
No, that's Samaria is where, Near East. That would be it. Look where where it says the lower Eastern Sea. That's actually, what is that called?
This is 730 BC. That's all.
No, that would be about right. Yeah, that should be about right. That should be about right.
Babylonia.
Yeah, Babylonia. Yeah.
Okay.
What's
Here
the?
then, wouldn't it be right here? By the Tigris. There's Babylon.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
right.
there
That's
it
the Tiger. Actually, this is what is called the Fertile Crescent. This is where it's believed where Babylonia is. That's believed to be, that was where Adam and Eve. That's where the Garden of Eden was in next to close to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Yeah. And Babylon is up there. It's a city. What's the name of that sea now? The Persian Gulf. That's what it's called.
Gulf.
Yeah, that's what it's called. Where it says the lower Eastern Sea, that's the Persian Gulf.
This Bible says the Bitter Sea, and then it has in parentheses Persian Gulf.
Okay, mine calls it the lower or Eastern Sea, but that's the Persian Gulf. Okay. Okay, so that's where, and what happened is, just so you know, is that when how different countries dealt with things varied depending on the country. Rome came in, conquered people, and they would bring Romans in to live in those areas, but they left the people where they were, and they would garrison soldiers. That's why by the time of Jesus, you've got Roman military all over the place and that kind of thing. The way the Assyrians and the Babylonians, which, I mean, it's one and then it becomes the other. I think it's Babylonians first and then Assyrians. The way they did it was when they went in and conquered a place, they took all of the elite, if you were wealthy or educated or were an artisan, all of those kinds of things. They took all of those people, rounded them up, and they shipped them off. And so all you were left with was sort of the bottom of society. And then they would bring in people from other areas into there, and so they would mix everything, and it made it really hard because the people that were left in Israel weren't the strong citizens. I mean, they were sort of the weakest, and then they brought in other people that they wound up having to intermingle with and intermarry, and that's actually where you get the Sumerians. The Sumerians were the people that were left in Israel when the others were carried off into exile, and then they intermarried with other people, and they sort of stayed being Jewish, but not exactly. They had some other things, and that's why there's so much animosity, because when the strength of society was brought back from exile, they looked down on them because they had intermarried. They weren't supposed to, and so they thought it was bad.
Why did the Romans do that? Did they think they could control those?
They could.
better?
The Babylonians and the Assyrians did, yes, because they thought they could control them better, and they could. Because if you take all the leadership of the area, I mean, and we're talking the elite in all different areas, and you take them and put them somewhere else, you don't have to worry about those other guys.
Or
They
just follow
they
along?
they can't find took us with both hands. You know, I mean, they're not the sharpest tools in the shed, and and so they just do whatever they're, yeah. So it makes it a lot. Now I feel like then they have to watch this other group, because they might cause problems, but they're not where they're used to be. And so yeah, that was why they did that. Rome, on the other hand, they just come in and occupy you, and boom, they just take over and put a lot of military there, and as a result, they were continually dealing with uprisings and all that kind of stuff, because they had a hard time. They couldn't control the people. They had a harder time controlling the people because all the leadership was still there. And if they wanted to rise up, they had the leadership to do that.
Sounds like Northern Ireland.
In extent, it's a lot of different places. Yeah, a lot of different places that kind of thing happens. So, okay, I'm going to turn the AC up just a little bit. How did you guys, out of curiosity, how was the sanctuary this morning?
It was a little.
I got a little cool.
Little cool?
I thought it was great.
But did you get a little cool as we went along?
You like it colder?
Yeah,
It's
I
one of those-
do.
I came in this morning, and it was set on 68. It was like a sauna. I'm not sure what was going on. I mean, it was, and I turned it down to, I know it was 66, and so I knew it was probably going to get a little cool. Part of the deal there is that when the doors open up, it lets a lot of air. But what I didn't think about, and Lou pointed out to me, is that with those windows and with the sunshine, it stays warmer, and so that could have been part of it too. But I know I didn't. People were not. I mean, a lot of times I can tell. When the whole back of the group was like about to pass out because it was so hot back there. That was. But it was set on like 68. It's not. It's. I don't know what the deal is. That area is the hardest area to try to get and then in here is not a lot better because that'll be on for about 5 minutes, and then we'll be going.
Yeah.
So
And then it goes off, and then we're going.
Yeah. Okay. So go ahead. Do you have a question?
I was gonna say where I said I was a little cool, and when we left church, Peggy, where she said she was a little.
But see, you guys are right there. You're right by the doors, right? Yeah. And your door you were over on the left. That door came open at least twice during the service.
Oh, it did.
Yeah. Somebody got up. I don't know who got it.
Carolyn got up
once, and no,
she was coughing.
Yeah, she was coughing, but it was he got up. Yeah, I got up a couple of times people got up to close it because it just came. I don't know if it just didn't get closed good or what. And then the other door, the handle is broken, and so they had to flip to keep it from closing, so you couldn't get into it. Well, then that allows a little bit. So it was strange. It was strange.
All right.
Yeah, but it wasn't as bad as it could be.
No,
Wasn't as bad as it could be. Okay.
Terrible.
So we're going to start with Daniel 1. We're going to begin with Daniel, and we'll probably get through at least a little bit. We may get through most of the first chapter. And this is sort of giving us a background on Daniel, okay? A background on Daniel. So, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah. Now, just so we're clear, that they're even though they're in exile, they still had kings. They allowed the kings to remain, to kind of sort of, I guess, be leaders of the people and that kind of thing. It doesn't mean they had any power. And in terms of numbering or in terms of dating, The dating is not the third year of the reign of King Jehoiakim. Maybe the third year that he was in exile, not the third year he was on the throne. So you have to be careful with the dating. I don't know that the dating is this. Mine says the third year of Jehoiakim was 606 BC. So isn't that what you guys said, that it was from 60 something?
Mine said 605 to 530.
Okay, so 605. Okay, so about then, right? King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord let King Jehoiakim of Judah fall into his power, as well as some of the vessels of the house of God. These he brought to the land of Shinar, and mine has a or Theodosian. Oh, okay. And in mine it says the Hebrew in the Greek is Theodosian. That's the name that the Greek version of this would use. But then in the Hebrew it says Shinar, and then it adds to the house of his own gods. So in other words, he brought the serving vessels out of the temple to this Shinar, which is wherever they worship their god, and put them into the house of his own god. Or I guess it says, place the vessels in the treasury of his gods. Now, or I don't know whether that means they didn't really use them or they did use them. We don't know. But but think about that. That's a psychological thing, right? If there had been an Ark of the Covenant, right? Because the Ark is actually gone by this point. The Ark has I don't remember exactly when it disappears. I need to do some checking on that because I'm pretty sure of that. But if it
destroyed or has
it just disappears. It disappears because there is the belief, and I mean this is a pretty substantial belief, although it's not proven at all. But there's the belief is that it's in Ethiopia, that it was taken, that it was taken into somehow or other. Someone got it out of the country. It went to Ethiopia and it's hidden in a church somewhere there in Ethiopia. And the place that they say it is, they won't let you in to see it. And
so there's some guy that guards it, and he comes out every once in a while and he'll talk to the people that are interviewing him or something. Right. But then some people say that's nonsense, that they don't that they believe that it was taken and it was destroyed, the gold was melted off and used and all that kind of stuff. Who knows? But even if the ark wasn't in there anymore, but this is still the temple where they are conducting the sacrifices and all that kind of stuff. To take all of those items and haul them off with you and not give them to you so that you can set them up in your own place of worship there, but they take them and put them in their place of worship. Or even worse, we'll put them in the back storage room with some of our trash, our junky stuff. This is treasure house.
Yeah, but I mean, but you understand what I'm saying? I mean, what that does. Think about this. If someone came into the Christian church, let's say not our church, but let's say St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Okay, I mean, you've seen that, right? Think of all of those, that golden, and that stuff is gold. That's not just brass. That's gold. Okay. If somebody came in and conquered that, think of if there was some kind of a war and Islam, people, soldiers of Islam marched into Rome and they seized the Vatican and went in, and they were going to haul everyone in the Vatican. They're going to take them into exile, and they take all of that stuff and they strip it out of St. Peter's, and then they take it back wherever, Dome of the Rock or the Hajj or whatever thing, and they put it in a back room somewhere back in there. What would that, think about what that would do psychologically to the people that were there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's messing with your mind, because that stuff is like uber important. That stuff is sacred, and you guys have defiled. Not only did you defile it by going in there and touching it, but now you've hauled it off and you just stuck it in a storage room somewhere. And man, that's sort of that oppressiveness. That's what they're doing. They're oppressing the people to keep them in line. And so it that part, it's important. It doesn't seem like much, but it is important. And it's important because later, when it's time to go back, those things still exist, and those things can go back and go into the temple when it's rebuilt. So they still exist. So there's kind of two ways there. Okay, so we have the vessels that have been hauled off. Then the king commanded his palace master Ashpenaz,
chief of his court officials, mine says.
Okay, right, chief of his court officials. Okay, doesn't mind it.
His chief eunuch.
His chief eunuch. Okay, yeah. Ooh, that's a little. Ooh, yeah. That's a little more personal. That's a little more personal. I don't know that I like that. Well, and some kings would do that. They would take courtly officials and they would have them castrated, because then they didn't have to worry about them around the queens or around the concubines or whatever. I don't. It's kind of like the Vienna Boys Choir, I guess, kind of thing. They do things or at least they did do things like that. Anyway, so he commands him to bring some of the Israelites of the royal family and the nobility, young men without physical defect and handsome, versed in every branch of wisdom, endowed with knowledge and insight, and competent to serve in the king's palace. So he's sending them to wherever the elite of the country have settled, and he's going to go. He's charged with going through and finding good, strapping young men, right, that are well spoken. They're well educated. They're kind of the cream of the crop. But notice, it's so that they can come back and serve in the king's palace. And in this case, by serve, they mean like be a butler or a waiter or something like that. That was the idea. And again, that idea of they've taken off our young people, our young men, in this day and age, sadly enough, young men are the ones that would be most prized by families, still that way in a lot of the world today. But they've hauled them off. They've taken them away from us. And it's not like they're taking them and throwing them in prison, which they could do, but instead they keep them in the palace where they can keep watch on them. Again, if they're there in the palace serving, that they're not causing problems over wherever they're at. So this is a way of controlling them, right?
And mine says that they brought them there to teach them the Chaldean language. The footnote said the language was Aramaic. The literature would have included mathematics, astronomy, and history, plus a strong dose of alchemy and magic.
Okay, and that word actually becomes problematic, the Chaldean, because Chaldean was not a word that was even used in that day and age, and that's one of the reasons why that actually is the term that is used. And mine says that. I just didn't read far enough, but that's a word that would have come later on. But on the other side, there are people that say that there are references to Chaldean, to that culture and all. So we don't know. Okay, but yes, so it is beyond just like menial service, but they're still serving in the palace. They probably would have had some menial service while they're doing their training and stuff. But yes, it's more than just that. You're right. They were to be taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans, and that the language is that your language says Aramean.
Mine says Babylonians.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's Chaldeans is another. It's just they're kind of interchangeable terms.
From Babylonian.
Yeah.
My footnote says it says Chaldean, and then up here it says Babylonian.
Right. Let me see what mine says. Mine doesn't deal with that one at that point. So, okay. Okay. But it is. I don't think the language, the Chaldean language and Babylonian. I don't think. I'll need to do some looking, but I don't think that was Aramaic, because Aramaic is a derivative of Hebrew, and I don't think there's no way the Babylonians would have spoke a derivative of Hebrew. But I'll have to look into that. Anyway, so they're gonna learn the language of the court and the literature, right? So they've been brought to the court. They're going to be taught the language and literature of the court. And at the same time, I assume that they are serving. They're doing something, because you wouldn't just bring them in and just teach them. They would be using them to do things. The king assigned them a daily portion of the royal rations of food and wine. So not only are they being educated, but they're being fed. And they're fed out of the royal rations, right? Food and wine. They were to be educated for 3 years, so that at the end of that time, they could be stationed in the king's court. So that would then they would move into at the beginning, they have just been servants, like we think of servants. But then once they're trained better, they may be moving into better positions within. I'm not sure exactly why the Babylonians would do that. I don't know why you would take people from a country that you conquered, why you would take some of their people and put them in your government. I don't know, but he does.
Maybe they were better looking than his people were.
Could be. And it maybe they were just smarter. I mean, that's if he recognized that they were inherently brighter and smarter people, then that was pretty good on him. I mean, because if they use them, they're still your servants. I mean, you can do with them as you want, but use them, right? Among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah from the tribe of Judah. Now, those are there have been other names. Okay, yeah. From the tribe of Judah. So these are all of these young boys. These 4 young boys are young men, not boys, although I don't know how old they were. But they're all from the tribe of Judah. So they're all from that same ethnic group, if you will. The palace master gave them other names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, something like that. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. Well, that should give you some. That tells you one of the stories right there, doesn't it? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Okay. Yeah. We know them a lot better by their alter egos, right? Than their real names. Than their real names. Do what?
A song, wasn't it? Was it a song? Shadrach, Meshach, and
Abednego. Yeah. There's It's an African American, one of those groups, a group that it's not like Motown or anything. It's way before that. It's before that. But yeah, there is maybe it's a gospel, maybe it's what we call a Negro gospel, Negro spiritual about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right?
I've heard those names since I was a kid.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
I didn't know what they were, but I heard them.
Yeah. Well, they're going to have their own story, so we'll get to that. That's a different story. So the plan is that they are going to eat the king's food, but Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the royal rations of food and wine. Now, it doesn't explain here exactly what that means, but probably if it was the royal food, that means it was food that had been offered. Like it had been blessed and consecrated at the temple of whatever their god was. The meat is probably animals that were sacrificed to their god. And so for Daniel, in his mind, I mean, we're kind of reading into what he thinks. For him to eat that food would be to worship idols. The whole thing that Paul is dealing with. In like what we talked about this morning in Sunday school, about eating the food that's been sacrificed to idols, right? You know, it's that same sort of thing. Daniel isn't willing to do that. He knows in his mind that will defile him, and it will make him a bad person, someone that's violating that idea of worshiping another god, so he won't do it. Now, God allowed Daniel to receive favor and compassion from the palace master. Now, so the palace master, that's the one that gave them the names, right? That's Ashpenaz. That's Ashpenaz, right? Okay. So he receives favor and compassion. The Lord kind of touches Ashpenaz and says, "Hey, you know, he's a good guy. Give him, you know, cut him some slack." And he said to Daniel, "I'm afraid of my lord the king." So I'm afraid of Nebuchadnezzar, as you should be. He's the king. He has appointed your food and your drink. He has told me what it is that you're supposed to eat. You're supposed to eat the royal ration and you're supposed to drink the wine, right? If he should see you in poorer condition than the other young men of your own age, you would endanger my head with the king. So he's worried because if you're not eating, I mean, probably the king's food is good food. I mean, it's the best food. And if you're not eating the king's food and you start looking puny, and this king starts asking, "Why are you looking puny? Are you eating the royal ration?" And he finds out I let you not eat the royal ration, then I'm going to catch it, right? You know, we understand that, right? So then Daniel asked the guard, whom the palace master had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Interesting how the other three got roped into that. It didn't say anywhere here that they were in any way worried, but they get roped into this test. It says, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink." Which is in some ways dangerous, because water, I mean, you know, we were talking about this morning, but water in that place, in that day and time, in most cases was not really good to drink because it was contaminated. That's why most people in this ancient world would drink wine or something along those lines that had been fermented, because then all the bugs are killed and you don't have to worry about that. But probably what that means is that somewhere right there is a spring, and they have spring water, which would be filtered water, so it would be pure. So that's a good thing.
An oasis, well, that would be a spring, wouldn't it?
Yeah, normally it would be a spring, but they're not in the desert like that. They're in a city, so there probably are springs. There are wells and springs, and a spring is better water than a well. The water sits and things can leach into the well. I mean, we have problems with wells even nowadays. You know, you get people that get stuff in their wells. But then also they're going to eat vegetables, and that's somewhat problematic, because vegetables, for the most part, don't give you everything that you need in your diet. I mean, you need meat, and he's not going to eat meat. He's going to be a vegetarian.
You've got no protein.
Yeah, I know. So I don't know. Maybe in this case, maybe vegetables would have included beans. And if you're eating legumes, you do get protein from that. So maybe that's included in vegetables. We don't know. But so he says, "Test us. Let us give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. You can then compare our appearance with the appearance of the young men who eat the royal rations, and deal with your servants according to what you observe." So not a bad test. Give us 10 days, right? Give us 10 days. Give us what we want to eat. Let us eat that. At the end of 10 days, if we're worse off than the other guys, then you can make us eat whatever it is you want to make us eat, right? Now, we're going to hear at the end of those 10 days, they're going to appear better. I would suggest to you that probably a big part of that is that all of these other guys are getting drunk every night and not sleep and doing, they're doing all kinds of bad things, And so at the end of 10 days, they probably look pretty rough. The other guy, whereas Daniel isn't, because they're drinking water and eating vegetables, so that could be part of it. That could be part of it. But that's the test. So he agreed to the proposal. And now remember, this isn't the palace master. This is the guard. This is their guard. So they kind of go behind the palace master's back to the guard, and we get this little test. At the end of the 10 days, it was observed that they appeared better and fatter than all the young men who had been eating the royal rations. Now, I'm not sure how in the world they could be fatter. That's kind of strange, because you not, for the most part, you're not going to get fat on eating vegetables. But they're better. So, God bless them in some way. So the guard continued to withdraw their royal rations and the wine they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and skill in every aspect of literature and wisdom. And now wisdom, mine does have a reference to what wisdom would involve.
Mine just says learning.
Mine says science at the time.
Well, mine says, which for them would include diplomacy or statecraft. So that's even a little bit different. So it could be science of the time. What did you say, Susan? What did you say?
Learning. Mine just says
learning.
Literature and learning.
But diplomacy and statecraft. That's a different one. That's a different one to think of, right? Okay. So God gives them sort of this. That He makes them very wise, very, very wise. Daniel also had insight into all visions and dreams. So Daniel is blessed with an even greater power, and that is the ability to interpret visions and dreams. Okay? And in this day and age, that's a big deal. We tend to poo-poo the idea of dream analysis and all that kind of stuff, and I don't give it any credence myself. But if God sends a dream to somebody and there's somebody there that can interpret it, and then, who's to say God can't do that? I don't think saying that you dreamed of falling out of a place and you're constantly falling. There are certain dreams that everybody has those dreams in some place. They don't mean anything. They're, everybody has them, but somebody comes up with this strange, bizarre insight into what they mean. But in this case, Daniel, this is it's a tool, and he's going to use it, right? Who else in the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament, who else does visions and dreams and is able to interpret visions and dreams? Joseph, very much so, right? Joseph. Yeah, remember the seven.
No, yeah.
The seven lean calves and the 7 lean skinny cattle and the 7 fat cattle and those kinds of things, all those dreams, the whole thing of you my brothers are going to bow down to me, the stars and all that kind of stuff. He did it even when it got him in trouble, when he shouldn't have. He did it. But yeah, very, very similar. So this is a similar kind of gift as to what Joseph had. Okay. At the end of the time that the king had set for them to be brought in, the palace master brought them into the presence of Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them. So they have sort of this royal interview, and the king is going to speak to them. And among them all, no one was found to compare with Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they are the cream of the crop, right? In the class of young men called in to be servants and learn and all this, they are numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Number 1 in the class, number 2 in the class, right? They're the top tier. Therefore, they were stationed in the king's court, so that they're kept close by, right? And what that then, if they're kept close by, what does that tell you? If they're specifically kept in the king's court,
Housed in the palace.
well, they're housed in the palace. But think about what does that mean for some of the other ones?
They're rejected.
Probably not rejected, but
little grumbly.
well, they may be sent off. they may be sent off to wherever because remember, this is a far-flung empire, and they have a fit. So these guys are like people that would work in embassies today, and so some of them are good enough to actually work in the White House, in the West Wing of the White House, and some of them are not so good, and they wind up becoming the whatever for the embassy in Caracas, Venezuela, or someplace. I mean, it's some of if you're not that good, if you're not that good, you get sent off. And so some of them would have been sent off, but these guys are so good that they keep them in the palace. So that's a big thing.
They got the gifted and talented program.
They were in the gifted and talented program, very much so, and it worked out well for them. So they're gonna be right there where all the action is. Well, and that's important because these stories have to be local in order for the stories. I mean, you know what I'm saying? If one of them had been sent off, let's say that Mishael had been sent off. Well, you couldn't have the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego if one of them ain't there. You know what I mean? I mean, if it's not there, you got to have all three of them to be there. Now, Daniel, you can't have the Daniel stories if Daniel's not there, and so they have to be. They have to be kept at the court, and I mean, they're kept at the court because they're good. That's the way it worked.
Did these guys all know each other beforehand? It doesn't say whether they did or not.
It doesn't say. I don't know whether they would have or not. They're all from the same tribe. They might have, but probably even if they didn't, when they brought them in, they probably would have congregated because they're all from the tribe of Judah. So they would see themselves like cousins. And so I would suspect that they may have known each other. Even if they didn't, they would have become close to each other at the time. And so we don't know for sure. Okay, I tell you what, it is now 5 minutes till, so we're going to stop right there. So we are 20. We are at 120, correct? 120. Okay. We are at 120. All right. So I'm going to turn this off. I will see you next week.